Hey, this is your Great Lakes dude, Jeff Liskey, coming to you on the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where we're going to be going rage angler on all things Great Lakes, from gear, fly, big water, and swinging flies, of course. If it concerns the Great Lakes, we've got you covered, so stay tuned to this next episode. In this episode, we're going to chit-chat and take a journey into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Yes, it's still Michigan once you cross that big, long Mackinac bridge and head north from the Lower Peninsula, but it almost seems like another state once you cross it. Things start to get a little more wilderness, a lot less towns and cities and villages, and just a lot of water and opportunities to explore. I used to take the kiddo and the wife up there on family vacations. And of course, it's a great family place, not only for angling opportunities, but you could also incorporate a family vacation with so much to do, looking at Picture Rock National Park along the south shores of Lake Superior. But we just always had a good time up there camping and fishing and hiking around. And sometimes you wouldn't see anybody for the entire week that we were there, especially if you didn't want to be seen. But bring your bug spray in the summertime. It can get a little buggy up there, of course, but you know, the trade-off is that it's just a great wilderness areas to explore. So we're back to what we're going to really be talking about is the angling opportunities that can offer. It's amazing. The diversity of the fishery. It's a very, very short season. Of course, winters can get a little harsh up north compared to down south on the south shores of Lake Erie where I'm living. But it's worth the effort to get up there sometime May all the way through November. So pack up the kiddos or grab your fishing partner and start heading up there and maybe make a plan this summer to do it. But to help you do it, I've invited on longtime friend, Captain Brad Petzke from River North Guide Service. Brad and I met a long time ago, and he is going to be running through his programs, his calendar year of how he dissects the inland lake trout fishing, inland lake trout streams, what species are available. He's also going to be chatting about the streams that run into Lake Superior, Huron, and Michigan that you can target the trout, the salmon, and of course some Atlantic salmons. Once we start digging into, everybody probably wants to hear about the Atlantic salmon program that runs up the St. Mary's River. Brad has that pretty dialed in. I've did it multiple times. It's an amazing man-made fishery there. And then he's going to graze a little bit about muskie fishing in the fall time. Can't not go up north without maybe trying to wet a fly for muskie. And then a little bit how he's starting on when everything falls apart and the rivers might get a little blown out or something, how he targets Lake Superior, stripping streamers out there for all the different multi-species that he can chase out there. So it's going to be a great episode. So stay tuned, and I'm excited to bring this episode to you. Today's episode is going to be super special. I'm super stoked. Longtime friend and fishing guide of over 20 plus years, Brad Petzke from Rivers North Guide Service. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hey, happy to be here, Jeff. This is technology, something I'm not used to. It just came to the UP a few years ago, this internet thing.
Yeah, the bandwidth's probably pretty low, right?
Right.
So let's just start out because you're probably one of the fishiest guys I know, but also very few people try to tackle the UP as a fishing guy because it's just a short, diverse season, but it's pretty intense because all the species. But why don't you give me a little background, how you got involved, from college, being up there in college, or however. Why don't you just start out and just tell everybody, the listeners, that, how you got started in all this?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Lower Michigan, St. Joe, Michigan. Cut my teeth on fishing the St. Joe River and Lake Michigan. Awesome steelhead fishing down there. Great river to call home as a kid. And when I was in high school, probably before high school, like junior high, I also got into skiing. So, fishing, skiing, that was my life as a kid. And when I graduated from high school, like a lot of people, I was like, oh, I got to get a job. What the hell do I do now? And I found out about a college in the Upper Peninsula, in the western part of the Upper Peninsula. It's called Gilgibit Community College, as far west as you can get in the UP, right on Lake Superior too. Ironwood, Michigan. They had a program called Ski Area Management. And I thought to myself, I'm like, oh man, this is pretty sweet. This is what I want to do. I want to, work at a ski area, and this would give me a foot in the door going through this program. So fresh out of high school, moved up to the UP. I maybe been to the UP a couple times before that. Didn't really know anything about it, and so my dad drove me up to Ironwood, and I had my truck with me. Followed him actually, and I get up to Ironwood, Michigan, and I'm like, holy cow, this was 1994. I get to Ironwood and I look at the town and I'm like, man, this town looks like 1960. Like, what's going on up here? And at that moment, I realized, okay, the UP moved at a slower pace and things evolve. Like, well, we're kind of like 5 to 10 years behind a lot of things. So I was joking about the internet earlier. And so I went to this small community college, learned how to run a ski area, and they had a job placement program, kicked me out to Colorado, worked at Copper Mountain Ski Area for, 3 seasons out there. I was a snowcat operator, and I made snowmaking, worked at Breckenridge during the summer a little bit, but during the summers out there, I didn't really work too much. I probably did like 2 days a week and just fished my butt off all across Colorado. I would just travel with my roommates, camp, pretty much fish the entire state. And while I was out there, in my head, I realized, you know what? I'm like, this trout fishing in these rivers is really cool, but my root of the Great Lakes, salmon and steelhead, big fish. I like fish that when you hook them, you don't know if you're going to land them. Like, that's appealing to me. The trout out there were cool, but, I'd pretty much had enough of that. So I decided to move back to Michigan. And lo and behold, Northern Michigan University in Marquette here in the Upper Peninsula had a ski area business management program that all my credits from my old school transferred to. So I thought, this is perfect. I'll go back to the UP and finish up college and see what happens next. Well, the moment I drove up to Marquette, I came into this town and I was like, wow, I'm like, this place is legit. It's right on Lake Superior, awesome vibe, cool people. And I knew, I'm like, this is my home. Like, I probably had lived here for a week and I'm like, I don't think I'm going to leave this place when I graduate college. So my whole time I was in college at Northern here, I had to formulate a game plan of how I could stay put in the UP. Well, I got a job at the ski hill at Marquette Mountain Ski Area. I became a ski instructor out there. So I'm like, okay, I have my winters covered. And I thought to myself, I'm like, I was getting pretty dialed in with the fishing up here because it's, every single day after school, it's all I did. And I got a job at a local sporting goods store and started making, networking, getting some good connections. And I started a small guiding operation on the side in combination of working at the ski hill and at the sporting goods store. And the rest is history, pretty much. The wheels just started clicking. And one thing that kept me going was, friends, associates, everybody. Well, there's no way you can make a living up here in the Upper Peninsula guiding people. You can't do that. Well, people don't like to be told they can't do something. So that was a good motivator for me and kept me going to make it happen. There was a lot of thin years, as every fishing guide has. You're not living high on the hog, but the longer you stick with something and you're motivated, things happen.
Yeah, just to go on the record, I met Brad in 1998. So he was not officially started his business in 2001, but I took the family vacation in August, and it wasn't the Chevy Chase with the, wood paneled station wagon, but it was pretty close. Bikes and the rafts and everything on top. And I usually take a day for myself with the family, and I look and I happen to see Brad's name. I was a business card or whatever. I give him a call, and temperatures are record high in the 90s. I call up Brad. He goes, "Yeah, I could take you fishing." Brad pulls up, and I don't know, what was it, Brad, a 1970 something Chevy pickup?
1987 GMC Sierra.
Yep. Next thing I know, he pulls up the little motel we're at, and he's got 2 tube floats sitting in the back, and he drags me out to some remote lake that was cool enough that we didn't have to put any trout under any stress with the hot temperatures. It was all spring fed. And next thing I know, we're floating around catching trout like crazy. And I was like, this guy has got his act together in the middle of nowhere. And ever since then, we've been friends. And every time you go fishing and you start to explore new fisheries and new fish, I'm like, you've taught me a lot, and you've taught me a lot that it's just a lifelong learning experience up there, up in the UP there. It's like its own little world. But why don't let's dive into maybe your calendar year. Like, it's a very short season, but maybe you could just dive into your calendar year and just maybe explain to the listeners of like how you go about seasonally, when you start and when you finish and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. This year we're having a strange winter, as pretty much all the Midwest is. So we're going to get an early start to our fishing season. But usually right now, March is winter up here. This is kind of the time of the year that is my least favorite up here, because we're transitioning into spring. But the transition from winter to spring is brutal. I mean, I don't really begin guide trips till about the 15th of April, because our season begins when, like most seasons for steelhead, when we have our melt off. And typically right now, I mean, our days this is 20-degree weather right now. We're having it in March. Once early or mid-April begins, our steelhead window in the spring is usually about April 15th till May 15th, I would say. The St. Mary's River, obviously longer. You can catch steelhead in the St. Mary's pretty much until the first week of June. And I regularly catch them, the end of June in the St. Mary's. The steelhead season actually overlaps into our trout season as well. I'll begin fishing, like you were talking about, the spring ponds that I do a lot of float tubing in. Those are pretty unique to our region. A lot of them are managed to have trophy-sized brook trout. I do all catch and release fishing on those type of lakes, but the trophy managed ones, you can keep one brook trout over 15 inches, and it's not hard to catch brook trout over 15 inches in those. The trophy lakes typically fish best from opening day of trout season, which is the last Saturday in April, till about the middle of June. Some of those are spring fed, so they'll fish later in the season. That's a unique fishery with float tubes that isn't readily available in the Midwest. Canada has some of that, as well as the Western states. During the spring time frame as well, I really enjoy fishing the big water out on Lake Superior, near shore, streamer fishing for steelhead, dropback steelhead that have came out of after they're done spawning. That fishing also can start kind of late April through really the whole month of May. Steelhead, lake trout, coastal brook trout, splake, herring, brown trout. I mean, it's you don't know what you're going to catch. You're fishing structure zones, river mouths, small creek mouths, smelt, lots of smelt available. Lake Superior has had pretty big boom in smelt over the past, I'd say, 5-year time frame. The bait balls I see on my graph in some of these areas are pretty impressive. That's a neat fishery. Obviously, weather is a big thing with that. Can't get out there. You got to have a backup plan. So the brook trout lakes is a nice backup plan. Awesome resident trout fishing. That window for resident trout, middle of May through June, is when we have our peak windows of dry fly emergences. So if you're really into like targeting large rising trout, during mayfly hatches, that's kind of the window for that. Trout fishing is available all summer long up here. We've got spring creeks that have awesome populations of native brook trout. So, I mean, you can go out the middle of summer and find super cold water that are kind of quintessential UP, small water, 3 weights that are like, 6.5, 7.5 foot rods, dry fly fishing. St. Mary's River, Atlantic salmon. That's something I start up in pretty much mid-June. I like to roll with that mid-June through about the middle of August. Once the middle of August comes, water temps are usually escalated. So catch and release fishing for the Atlantic salmon becomes harder. I lay off them once the water temps get into that mid to upper 60-degree range. It's just not worth it, and I get a lot of fishing in for them. And I'm sure we'll talk about the Atlantic salmon fishing more in the podcast, so I'm not going to go super in depth with it. But smallmouth fishing, muskie fishing, mid-August through kind of October 1. The smallmouth, I usually start to lay off of them about right after Labor Day because water temps start to crash a little. They start to become a little dormant. Muskies stay active for a little longer. Once that ends, I move into my fall salmon migrations as well as more Lake Superior fishing. The fall period on Lake Superior is really great fishing as well. Lake trout tend to move in closer, so the windows with those become bigger. This year, it was such a crazy winter this year. I was out on Lake Superior fishing, I think, until January 25th this year in my boat. And usually my boat is put away by November 20th, my big boat for the Great Lakes. But this year, the window just stayed open forever because of the weather. And I've never experienced fishing on Lake Superior that time of year. And it was awesome. All those lake trout were in close, and it's something I had never experienced. I don't know how many people who've lived up here their whole life can say they fish in Lake Superior in a boat in January. That's pretty cool. The salmon fishing on the rivers, do lots of coho on Lake Superior streams. That's something very unique to our region. I do some king salmon fishing on the Lake Michigan tributaries. The window for both of those fish would be middle of September through kind of the end of October for cohos. Cohos will spread out their run a little longer than kings. Kings, you get kind of a big money shot of those fish. Cohos will stagger more. Kings, not into eating flies. I don't even target kings with flies. If I'm fishing kings, it's all spin gear. Cohos, love flies. Streamers, chase them down. Cohos, if you can sight fish cohos too, which is really neat, and they'll chase a fly and eat it. Like I caught 2 of them on figure 8s this year, cohos, which was pretty we caught Atlantic salmon. The last few years, we started experimenting with figure 8s on Atlantic salmon. I think last year we caught 3 Atlantic salmon on figure 8s, and because they'll follow it right to the shore or right to the boat and then veer off. And I'm like, with the muskie experience I had, I'm like, I told my customer, like, just put one turn on that thing, and one turn with the rod underwater. They just, gobble it up. So I don't know if that's done anywhere else, but it'd be neat to hear some feedback on that from people.
No way, man. I think you're the very first to do that, a boat side maneuvers for that, but that's like, I call you super fishy.
Yeah. And then once, steelhead fishing, once the salmon fishing, chills out some, I usually start seeing my first wave of steelhead about that first week of October. And then those guys filter in all fall long, and we get into some giant lake run brown trout. Typically November and December is a good time for that. So as you can see, that's a little long-winded, but the amount of different fishing opportunities that are in this area is nothing short of world-class, really.
Dreaming of battling a giant rainbow trout in Alaska's untouched rivers? Turn that dream into a reality with FishHound Expeditions. Immerse yourself in the heart of Alaska, where epic landscapes and legendary fish await. Visit fishhoundexpeditions.com and mention this podcast to begin your adventure. FishHound Expeditions, your gateway to the ultimate Alaskan fishing experience. Skwala Fly Fishing, combining advanced materials with fishing-focused purpose-built design. Skwala waders, jackets, shirts, pants, and insulation are made for us. To help Wet Fly Swing listeners right now, Skwala is offering a 10% discount on your next order. Just visit skwalafishing.com and use the coupon code WetFlySwing10 at checkout. That's Skwala, SKWALA. Gear for us, the serious angler.
A couple bullet points is that I think it's very important, like you said, to have that backup plan ace in your hole, because Mother Nature can kick you right in the stomach. It's sort of the same with my fishery. It's like, well, this is really what we wanted to do, but we got 20-mile-an-hour winds out of the north, but I have this, this, and this. And I think a lot of times anglers just want to take that day and go fishing.
Right.
You know, you're going to offer it's like, hey, I'm not the best trout angler, but let's give it a shot. Or you're saying, hey, trout's a little, Atlantic salmon, the water's a little warm. Let's just sneak over and do something else. You're based out of Marquette. What's your range? Like, you're like me. Like, I have a range of 200 miles. Like, I probably guide 150 miles either way from my base camp. What's your range?
I was just doing my taxes the other day, and I was doing my miles.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, and I was looking at some of the miles I drive for a day. But going back what you said, too, you'll tell your customers, okay, we have plan A, B, and C. When I'm booking a customer, and a large percentage of my customers are guys that just fish with me on an annual basis, so they know this. But when I'm booking a day, I tell a customer, I'll be like, you know what? This is what I'm planning on doing that day, but we have a lot of different options, and we're just going to roll with whatever's the best. And I don't understand for the life of me how some people, guides even, get locked into doing one species or one river, and it's like, how do you work like that? Like, you have to have a contingency plan if A sucks. Like, who wants to go out if you're on some blown out river? Or, I want to catch fish worse than my customers do. I'm trying. Every day is a fishing tournament for me. And the only person I'm trying to outfish is myself. Like, every day I'm out there, I'm trying to just get better and have a great day. So, in the miles I drive, I'm very lucky. I have a lake home over in the western Upper Peninsula that was my wife's family's, that, when I fish the western UP, I try to pair it where I'm not running around like crazy. It's just idiotic to be driving that much, but, I'll fish over there for a time period. And then I have, like in Sault Ste. Marie for the St. Mary's, I have an apartment over there. So I basically have 3 base camps: my home, Marquette, base camp in the western UP, base camp in the eastern UP. So I'm limiting the driving as much as I can, because it sucks sitting all the time.
I know. I just did the same thing you did. I was like, geez, I have a 2019 truck with almost 160,000 on it already. It's what the heck?
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit. You have all these species of migratory Pacific salmon. You have pink salmon, you have the kings, but is it predominantly self-sustaining populations? Is there some, with Mother Nature, or I'm sure, Michigan does do some plants, of course, the Atlantics, but what about the salmon, Pacific salmon? Are those self-sustaining or what?
Yeah. So on the Lake Superior watershed, all of the Pacific salmon, king, coho, pink salmon, 100% wild. St. Mary's River as well. None of that is stocked. There's only a few rivers. Actually, there's only one river in the UP that gets a stock of king salmon. And ironically, that river also gets a very good run of wild fish. So you'll have, wild and, stockfish, but all the Lake Superior streams, it amazes me, they stopped stocking cohos, I want to say, like in the 80s was probably the last time they stocked cohos in Lake Superior streams. And this last year was an epic year for cohos in Lake Superior. Size-wise, we had cohos in the upper 20-inch range, 8 pounds, and tons of them. Like, ask anybody who trolling guys on Lake Superior. And I was thinking, I'm like, man, I wonder if all these cohos are Canadian fish that are going in the Canadian tribs. But we saw some of our tribs here in the UP just like have epic runs return last year of cohos, which was neat. Kings, we don't have a ton of kings in Lake Superior. They cut out the stocking program, I want to say like 5 or 6 years ago. So all the returns you're seeing now are wild fish. There's just not the habitat and the bait fish population in Lake Superior for kings. So they never really got huge. There is some still. And I think there's one river in Ontario that gets the majority of those kings that spawn in it. And so there was a pretty good run, I guess, on that river last year. Lake Superior or Lake Michigan streams, not a lot of kings either, other than, where they're stocked, and not a ton of coho. More steelhead on the Lake Michigan side of things than king.
Yeah. In the is the brown trout fishery more coming in from Superior or more from the Lake Michigan, Lake Huron sections coming up from the south going north, or you're coming north into your, that south shores of Superior?
There is a real good population of wild brown trout in a few selected Lake Superior tributaries. Some excellent sized fish. There's only a few of them that have the habitat for those fish to wildly reproduce in, but 100% wild on those two, I believe. They don't get as big as the Lake Michigan ones. Say a big, you're not going to get really any over 30 inches out of Lake Superior. Lake Michigan, there's a few rivers that we have that get, massive. I've caught them 25 pounds out of the Lake Michigan rivers, but you don't have the wild reproduction on those Lake Michigan rivers like you do up on the Lake Superior. Just not good habitat for natural reproduction.
Yeah, I feel the UP, it's like an island by itself. It's a whole separate little world from, everywhere else. Then you continue on Superior to the North Shores up in the Canadian waters, like you said. I was just up there with Jerry Darkus doing the Nipigon thing and with Neil LeDuc, and just it's endless exploring, which you've got countless thousands of hours doing. But maybe let's backtrack and let's just start out with like a normal migratory, run fish. Are you doing indicator fishing? Are you doing the typical, bottom bouncing? You swinging flies or stripping streamers? Or what's the program if you're going up into one of your tributaries, if somebody's like for the migratory fish?
Sure. It kind of depends. All the tribs are different, just like down by you, I'm sure. But say we're spring steelhead fishing, max runoff, typically the Lake Superior streams, these are I got to just label them as an aggressive type river. They're steep terrain, all rock. They're typically going through like gorges. So it's all, out of that is all whitewater that we're fishing. You can't walk across a lot of the rivers when they're anywhere near like runoff conditions. So a lot of that fishing does involve bottom bouncing in the springtime. Once those rivers chill out a little bit, my favorite fishing on the Lake Superior streams in the spring is for the dropback steelhead. It's almost like you're fishing for fall steelhead once those fish have spawned, because the only thing they're doing then is eating. They're eating just so they can get back home, and you're
Yeah.
You're fishing fast too. You're not, couple casts here, couple casts there. If the fish is there, they're going to eat it. And, during that time period, there's a whole variety of different, you can swing small streamers through the slower areas. Indicator fishing is, super productive. But when we're at that max water runoff, you would never get any type of quality presentation unless you were using some type of lead on the Lake Superior streams. In the fall, fall fishing for steelhead, a lot of bead fishing during that time frame. And the majority of all that is all indicator fishing. The fall period before the water gets cold, when those fish are just moving in, like that October time frame. That's awesome streamer window there.
Yeah. My next question would be like any on a dry fly, the dropbacks on a dry fly.
I've caught some Atlantic salmon on dry flies. up here, but I've never caught. I've had them eat indicators like crazy. It's like,
Right.
and every time they do it, I'm like, why don't I just have some big ass, stupid dry fly? Because if they're trying to eat a floating plastic ball, you see them come up. They come up and they look at it and they're like, oh, and then they just go back down. I'm like, that's your trout instinct right there, trying to do it. And that happens to me trout fishing too, like all the time. Have the huge brown come up and look. They'll actually try to eat the indicator though. Like they'll grab it and people will set at it. And I'm like, hey, there's not a hook on that little plastic.
Yeah. I had to ask that question because that's how I started like forcing myself occasionally on those drop back days. Just like, rather than putting the bobber on, I just said, well, we'll just put this big floating caddis on here. Maybe, but that's pretty cool.
I remember you telling me about that, like when you first started doing it, and you're like, yeah, got some this year. And I'm like, that's pretty badass, man. To have the patience to go out there and do that. I mean, it's almost like fly fishing or fishing poppers for muskies. It's like you're gonna get some hits eventually doing it. You got to be in the right frame of mind to go out there and do it.
Yeah, it's like you throw that thing out there, and like you said, you see their eye disposition start doing the blinky blink and looking up. You're like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
And then they just explode to the surface. But so, all right. So that's the migratory. So now let's maybe before we step into Lake Superior and St. Mary's, which is like where I really want to hear about. You talked about those inland lakes and stuff. Is that a still water program and the creeks is a lot of dry flies, or maybe just do a short little summary of the trout game you got going on up there?
Yeah. So we got, an awesome variety of different types of trout fishing too. The float tubing is all still water lakes. I would say the majority of the lakes are under 40 acres. So small. If you like remote, kind of pristine places and adventures, a lot of them are hike-in type lakes where, you blow up your float tube, you have backpack straps on the float tube, you put the float tube on, you bring your lunch with you, you got your rods, and you hike 15 minutes to a half hour into these lakes and spend the day in there, catching fish, fishing, and then hike out at the end of the day. And those are the biggest brook trout in the UP. I mean, other than like coastal brook trout on Lake Superior. If you wanted to target, specifically target large brook trout, you're going to catch them in the inland lakes. The streams we fish for brook trout range in size. There's some larger tributaries for inland resident trout. You can float some of these rivers with drift boats or rafts. The majority of our trout fishing is all wading. Brown trout, brook trout. A lot of the streams are primarily brook trout. Both of them cohabitate in them. So we have some pretty big brown trout up here in some of our streams. We don't get a lot of the hex fishing. People ask me about that. That's more of a Lower Michigan thing. The composition of our streams, like at least the rivers that I fish, most of them, like your biggest mayfly you're going to see is going to be a brown drake. And usually a lot of our mayfly hatches are kind of over by July 4th. After that, there's some mouse fishing opportunities. I don't really get into the mousing. I've got other, fisheries that I'm doing at that time frame that conflict with it. But you can fish spring creeks for native brook trout from May until they close, which is the last day in September. And September is a cool time to fish those small creeks because the brook trout are all colored up in their spawning colors. And, that's kind of Hemingway and John Volker, two famous, guys that used to fish up here. They loved the UP for the trout fishing. It's a unique thing that we have to offer up here.
Yeah. Is there a closed season when they start spawning, or no? Is it just catch and release, or how does that work?
It depends on the river, but the last day of September is typically the last day of trout season.
Okay. Now, your fly selections when you're on the still water would be, a couple of, below an indicator instead of different depths, or is it just pretty simple? And how do you, I mean, because you could be fishing a little deeper, right, in the summer, or are they up high?
As the season goes on, those fish go down. So that's why I kind of tend to chill out on it a little bit after June because the water temps earlier in the season, those fish are, you have a uniform temperature throughout the water column. So the fish are in closer to shore. They're more active. I fish a lot of different fly lines in there. We do get some midge hatches. So you can catch fish on dry flies, which is pretty cool. And then also the streamer fishing and nymphing is primarily what you're going to do in those, anywhere from intermediate to like the density compensated full sink lines work really well.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering about that. So you're not using like a full-on streamer. The density compensated triple density ones work really well.
Yes, yeah. It depends. The later in the year, early in the year, you can run flow lines with streamers in those lakes pretty much almost that whole month of May. But if you're getting in there in June, I pretty much rarely get in there in July to the brook trout lakes. But July, you're definitely going deeper then.
Let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor. Waters West Fly Fishing Outfitters is your go-to resource for spay and swung fly techniques for the OP and beyond. They're known for their deep selection of unique high-quality fly tie materials, and they are the gateway to some of the great steelhead rivers in the country. I was able to get out on the water with Ed, and it was an amazing day. We hit the shop early, met him at the shop. We fired up the old vehicle and headed out on the river. Ed is the type of guy that you feel comfortable right from minute one, and it was a good day. We ended the trip 4-bying into this unimproved boat ramp, pulling the boat out, and then we ended up with a great opportunity and landed a very nice Cromer. Fished one of the great rivers in the country. It was amazing. Not only do they cover steelhead, but all species in the area, and they have a passion for all fish that swim up or live around salt. They can outfit any angler from the beginner to the most hardcore fishing bum you can imagine. They have a great online store, fast shipping, and you will be supporting conservation when you support Waters West. Please check in with Ed and Kyle right now to say hi and let them know you heard from them on this podcast. And you can do that right now, wetflyswing.com/waterswest. Helena exists as a crossroads between past and present, tame and untamed, mountainous wilderness, and hometown warmth. A place where you can float the river without seeing a soul, stroll through their charming downtown, enjoy breweries and breathtaking views all in the same day. It isn't a secret for passionate anglers that Helena is most sought after for its close vicinity to world-class blue ribbon fishing on the Missouri. Then what is the secret about fly fishing in Helena? The continual slow ripple of the river, animals roaming the banks, the solitude of the river surrounded by mountains, and of course, the sound of a rod bending to an epic trout. For those looking for serenity and a low-key fishing destination, Helena's Missouri River begs to challenge new and advanced fly fishing anglers in Montana. They are unexpected, unfussy, unspoiled. They don't pretend to be anything they're not, and they are proud of who they are. But don't take it from us. Come discover Helena's fly fishing secrets for yourself. Visit Helena, Montana right now. That's HelenaMT.com.
So trout game, you got the migratory fish game. Now let's start getting in my wheelhouse that I've been pretty diving in deep is, the big water and St. Mary's and that. But tell me about the Lake Superior. Like it's just this unbelievable crystal clear vodka water. You probably get to see them cruising around the river mouths and stuff. So tell me the program you got going on out there.
Yeah, it's a neat place to fish. There's so much for me to still learn out there, but targeting fish during the right time of the year out there is the key to success. Finding depth breaks that these fish tend to hang out at by islands. Islands are a great spot to start at. River mouths, different types of structure on the shoreline. There's a lot of Lake Superior. If you're out there in a boat and say, you can see down 30 feet of water to the bottom pretty much. But you'll see a lot of Lake Superior is just this flat rock that just extends out from shore and just keeps going out, out, out. Well, I mean, you'll see like cracks in it and stuff. Well, flat rock, nothing can really live in that area. I mean, because it's not home, it's not hospitable for bug life or minnow life or anything like that. Catching fish in shallow water areas on Lake Superior, you're fishing areas that have cobble, rock cobble. That's where, bug life, minnows, it's spots these things can hide or they can be born. That's hospitable home for fish as well, because there's bait and then there's also, somewhere for the fish to hide. And then depth breaks where you're coming. A lot of areas I fish too are sand areas that just come from sand, that's 10, 15 feet. And then you'll see the drop down to oblivion pretty much. Fishing those depth breaks with sinking lines. Smelt love those depth breaks like that. Like in May, you'll catch fish that, are puking up smelt off those depth breaks. Splake, I do a fair amount of splake fishing out there in Lake Superior. Those depth breaks, that's absolute key. Finding those, and you'll find the smelt and the splake.
Yeah. So maybe back up for the listeners. What is a splake?
Splake is a man-made fish. It's but ironically, so what they are is a mix between a lake trout and a brook trout. In the spring, they look more like lake trout. In the fall, as summer goes along, they start to color up and resemble brook trout. But they're manufactured by Michigan DNR and hatcheries and released. They like them because they say, they tend to stay near shore. So they offer a fishery, like I just explained, that people can target without going way offshore, trolling for lake trout or whatever. And they're a super diverse fish. I mean, I see them rising for bugs even. They act like brook trout. They'll eat a whole variety of different flies. They're super aggressive like a brook trout would be. They're a neat fish. They get up to, I've caught them over, about 25 inches, I would say. So they get pretty big. A neat story about it, Blake. I'll tell you, I went to college here at Northern Michigan University, and when I first moved here, I didn't know shit about fishing around here, and but I knew how to steelhead fish from growing up downstate. So I was on a local river in Marquette, and I was fishing in the fall, fishing this pretty heavy water, drifting like an egg pattern. And I hooked up, and I'm fighting it, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I'm like, holy cow! I'm like, this is the biggest brook trout I've ever seen in my life. And I landed this brook trout that was like, I don't know, 8 pounds, and I'm by myself. I didn't have a camera, and I'm like, I got to keep this thing. I got to keep it. And I kept it, and I brought it back home, and I showed my buddy. I drove to his house. I was like, dude, you are not going to believe this brook trout I caught. And he looked at it, he's like, well, what the hell did you keep it for? And I'm like, I kind of panicked. I was young, and I kept it. And he's like, well, that might be a splake. And I'm like, I didn't even know what the hell a splake was, And so I took it to the DNR, and I was like, hey, can you examine, give me an ID on this fish? And the biologist was like, well, it sure looks like a brook trout, but the only way to tell the difference between a brook trout and a splake is to cut the fish open, and there's this little part of its intestine that has these strands on it. And I don't remember, but he said, oh, if it has 4 strands, it's a brook trout. If it has 8 strands, it's a splake. Well, it was a splake. And, but that's the only way to specifically ID one of those is to count these strands on the intestine.
Wow. I never knew that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So now that you're out there, you're fishing these breaks, you're using shooting lines, right? So I'm using the SA 25 cold sink, 250, 300. Is that sort of your go-to line, or using the multi-densities, or what are you doing?
The same stuff that you use. Yeah, I carry a variety of them. A lot of that, in the spring and in the shallower areas, I run the 200.
Okay.
I find that 200 is I use that for an incredible amount of different types of fishing. That's my most used line in that series. I also use floating lines, and when that water, those fish can be real tight up to shore. And you'll see them moving on bait. A lot of that bait will hang out, this far under the surface, and you'll see them. A really neat thing to see. I don't know if this happens anywhere else in the Great Lakes, is in the spring when the cohos are in. And I mean, spring, I'd say, end of April through middle of June. I saw it this year in July even, though we had a cold summer. You'll be fishing and they're pods of cohos and they're eating bugs literally, and they're right below the surface, but there'd be massive pod of cohos. I don't know, say 30 of them, but you can target these with nymphs just under the surface or small streamers. Cohos are really aggressive, so they're not super particular, but you'll see these pods and you can move into them. And it takes a good caster because you can't get super close to them or they'll spook. But you can use the electric to just kind of bump into them, bump, and then get a shot on them, which is a neat thing to see on Lake Superior.
Yeah, we know the steelhead are opportunistic, feeding on the bugs and the beetles on the scum lines. And I think Superior being so sterile, like you said, in so many places, they have to be adapt, right?
Right. Like they're a very adaptive fish versus a king. Kings will not act like that.
Yeah. That's why they just swim around in a circle looking for an alewife and eventually say, I'm done.
Yeah. I see on Lake Superior too in the fall, early fall, say Labor Day to maybe September 20th, flying ants. You'll get flying ants in some areas coming out by like kind of river mouths, and that can bring up some huge fish. It can be maddening because fish will rise right here. Okay, get your cast in that area. Well, then 5 seconds later, he's way the hell over here, and it's like you're chasing them, and it's like, all right, do I want to throw dries at them or just cover this whole area with streamers? But not a lot of places you could, dry fly fish on Lake Superior.
So you have the boat, you're guiding on a boat, which is more effective. But what about the angler? Could they do some of this from the shore without having a boat? That's for the listeners, like, well, geez, that's nice. Brad's booked up, his guys are booked up, but I still want to enjoy this fishery. Is there viable Lake Superior, streamer fishing from the beach? And, is that possible?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anywhere there's a lot. There's a ton of public lands up here that have accessible river mouths. Anywhere there's a river mouth, you're going to have fish. Just being there at the right time is the critical part of it. But yeah, look at a map and just figure out where your public lands are, hike into those. A lot of those places you can camp, which is really cool. I've started doing a lot more camping the last few years with my guiding because of the driving, and some of the areas that I fish, isn't hotels, and I don't want to drive an extra 50 miles just to sleep in a hotel and, bring the family up and you can do some fishing and they can camp and great time.
Yeah. It's basically like an adventure.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the stuff I like to do. You never know where you're going to end up or what you're going to do for the day, but this is where we're at for now. But
right.
Let's gravitate and move on to, I'm sure everybody wants to hear, because everybody loves these Atlantic salmon, and they go up to the, up in the northeast part of the country, up into Quebec and British, New Brunswick and stuff. But I always tell people that if you wanted to actually handle Atlantic salmon, to go visit you on the St. Mary's River. So maybe let's talk about the St. Mary's River Atlantics, and that program up there, and, how you approach that a little bit too. That's pretty cool, pretty special place.
Yeah, we feel pretty blessed to have such an awesome, unique fishery right here in our backyard. I started Atlantic salmon fishing probably not long after you and I met, when I was in college, or probably just out of college, actually. One of my friends and I, we heard about it. Oh, and it wasn't very popular back then compared to what it is now. Yeah, we trailered my drift boat over and put a little motor on it, and, motored in the river, and oh, this is different than anything we'd ever experienced before. And figuring out, what we do over there. I talked to a lot of people around about, the fishery, and everybody has in their mind what Atlantic salmon fishing, they think of traditional Atlantic salmon fishing. There's pretty much nothing traditional about fishing over there for Atlantic salmon. A lot of the techniques, flies that are used over there are ones that I've actually invented and created. It's a lot of it deep water fishing. There's a few brief time periods that the fish are eating on top or just under the surface where you can use some of the more traditional Atlantic salmon techniques. But it's an ever evolving place too, where every year I'm discovering and figuring out new things, which is great from a guiding aspect because we're always constantly improving and evolving into the next wave of fishing there.
Yeah, I give Brad credit I call it the silver assist. I was with Brad a long time ago, and we were fishing the St. Mary's, and it was one of those days that you couldn't throw a fly rod. It was super, super windy, and they were chasing streamers, and he brings out a shooting line with, 3-4 foot of mono. You put the swivel with the small barrel swivel, and we sort of did the old chuck and duck, hucked it out there in the blowing winds with the streamer patterns. And that's the way we had to fish that day. Like you said, very adaptive, right? And I've used that technique. The guys call it the tumble rig out there for trout fishing up on the Connecticut, but just taking away that purist fly fishing attitude sometimes, it was really opened my eyes like, well, that's what we're dealt with for that day. But I give you credit for that technique all the time, and I've used it ever since. Winds are blowing over 30 miles an hour, gusting to 30, and you're just like, you can't even get a fly cast off sometimes. So I give you credit to that technique. And then, so the bait fish that you have you have that, like you said, occasionally the nymphs and stuff like that. Do you ever like post up and swing flies, strip swing flies, with the electric going and work your way down through the current and stuff? Or is it mainly just working certain areas, or just like, because it's a pretty diverse area through there with power plants, and you can't fish up in the where the compensator gates are and up in the Canadian waters, but you fish down below that where it's much bigger. Do you swing flies and strip flies and keep moving, or how do you approach that like that?
Yeah, I've evolved into using a lot of two-handed rods there now. The greatest thing with that too, there's a time period where I'm going full float, floating tip, streamers that are under the water only inches. And you're actually, seeing the grab, the boil.
Nice.
Or you're feeling the grab, which is really exciting for the customers to do. And yes, a lot of different types of water there. You've got tail out from the Canadian Rapids. That's within U.S. waters, a lot of that. So I do a lot of fishing over there. You've got several different hydroelectric dams. You've got downstream areas as well that hold fish. Lots of smelt in the river there. So the Atlantic salmon key on the smelt during certain times of the year, during certain times of the day when they're available. The bait isn't always available. You and I could fish today and we'd have a great day, swinging flies with smelt patterns. Then tomorrow we'll go out there and water temps can change on that river because of winds. The wind affects the water on Lake Superior and it'll move that water around. And I've seen it, where we'll get a 8-9 degree water crash in overnight period if we have a correct wind that'll flip the water. So that'll move the smelt out of the zone, and then all right, it's a different type of fishing for the next day.
Yeah. So one of the most famous rivers is the Garden River, which the Canadian waters. But do you ever like go down that way towards that and take a look? Because I've had people ask, and myself, there's that strain where the pinks mate with the king salmon called the Panook. Do you ever run into any of those? Or that's pretty cool, unique species.
Yeah, I've caught a fair amount of those over the years. There used to be a ton of them. There was a time period, probably, when was that? Mid to like 2000, probably 2008-ish, where that river was crazy with kings and pinks and Panooks. And that Garden River was an insane populator of those fish. That it was such a perfect breeding ground for kings and pinks. And you would go into that. I used to go up into that river every fall and just fun fish for a couple days and camp up there. And there would be sections of that river where you would look and you couldn't cram another fish into there. I mean, it was just like the stuff you see on television about Alaska. And, when Lake Huron crashed because of the bayfish population, so did, the population of those Panooks. So that's nothing like it used to be, unfortunately, but pretty neat to experience that.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was still around. 'Cause I remember the heydays, and I haven't frequented up there over a lot lately. So I was just like, it's a pretty cool fish, and it's just unbelievable. If you go downstream, it's a heck of a warm water species. Down the lower end of St. Mary's too. But so that's just grazing the surface of that super cool fishery there. And then we'll just finish up that. You got the warm water thing. I know you're super, super busy. You probably only get out a little bit of muskie fishing here and there just because you're so busy with so many other opportunities. But, is that something you do, maybe occasionally, or what's the skinny on your muskie program and, something like that, or carp? Is that just a fill-in sort of like how you usually do it?
No, I mean, I've got a specific season for the muskies. It's something I really love doing. Takes the right person to go out and fish for the musk. If you have to go out and catch fish to have a good time, like probably not for you. But we've got some really fantastic muskie fishing across the whole UP, lakes, rivers, Great Lakes. There's really something for everybody. And it's a good part of my fishing program. The carp fishing that I do, I don't do a ton of that. That's more on a personal level. I love fishing for carp on the Great Lakes, and I don't get out to do it as much as I'd like to. Is during a time period that we have so much else happening that weather, you got to have perfect weather. You got to have good water temp. So unfortunately, I don't get to do as much of the carp fishing as I'd like to.
Yeah, I was just thinking if you had it, I'd imagine that to be some bay or something off of Superior just to keep it warm enough. But just with that unlimited visibility of the water, I could just say sight fishing would be pretty cool. But because that could be a backup, right? That's usually what I tell people. It's like, we're targeting these, but by the way, take a look to our left. We got a pot of carp working, whatever it is. You rustle down in the boat and you grab the right rod and the gear and you deviate and go right for the carp. That's how I sort of, approach the carp program too.
As good as me, it's like carp fishing, you got to have a good angler who can move some line to go after those, because they are not a stupid fish. Those are some of the hardest fish to catch that I fish for, at least.
Yeah, I put them harder than muskie sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. They are, everything's got to be right for them to eat.
Including the first cast, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You blow up that cap, they're all gone, and you're like, all right, well, let's go find some more now. What's an easy find those?
Yeah. So I started out with a story. Do you have any stories that you'd like to share that you sort of memorable, like camping or just a great fish to do one of the best fishing days or something? You have a story on the top of your head? I don't want to put you on the spot, but
sure, yeah, I can share. I have a couple of them that were, like we were talking about, kind of wilderness type settings. This was probably, I don't know, about 10 years ago. I'm floating down the river. We were smallmouth fishing this day. This is central Upper Peninsula. And I had a customer. He was an older guy. And the beginning of the day, hey, we're smallmouth fishing. You mind if I keep some of these and bring them home? And I'm like, they're smallmouth. Who eats smallmouth? He's like, well, I'm paying you. So, I'm like, well, sir, it's just catch and release. And, oh, fine. All right. So he's kind of crabby, I'm like going down the river and he gets snagged. So I'm like, all right, I drop the anchor out of the boat and pull it on the rod. And I'm like, just pull it back and break it. And pulls it back, breaks it. And I'm looking down, tying a knot. And I can hear some noise on the side of the river. And there had been some ducks that were like, when you're going downstream and you scare the ducks, they fly 100 yards and land. And I thought, oh, that's those ducks, and he was like eating a sandwich or something. And all of a sudden I looked up while I was tying the knot and I was like, holy and I didn't know if I should say anything to the guy even because he wasn't even paying attention. And then as soon as I was looking at him, he was from the bow. He looks up and he's like, Brad, there's a bear right here in front of us. And there's literally this giant ass black bear, I don't know, 25 yards in front of the boat, standing there looking at our boat. And I'm like, hey, this is middle of the day. And I'm like, hey, bear. And I'm like, yeah, I know, Jim. I see the bear. Hey. And he starts panicking, waving his arm. What's the bear do? Starts swimming across the river, literally right in front of the boat. And then just swims across looking at us and then scales up this giant hill. And he looks back and he's like, kind of this panic look in his face. And I'm like, well, I don't think he's going to swim upstream at us though. That was a neat experience. And I've had wolves do that same damn thing, cross right in front of us, and need to have wildlife like that in our backyard.
Yeah, that's what separates your waters to a lot of other waters, right? You never know what's going to be around, and it is really remote. And if you're willing to put in that little extra effort to get back in those areas and, get out with you or even on your own, explore up there, it's a pretty cool thing. I'm going to wrap it up. I think what I'd like to do now is just say, how can they get a hold of you, Brad? Like Facebook, Instagram, why don't you tell the listeners how they can get a hold of you, chit-chat with you, and like that?
Yeah, so you can get a hold of me through my website, probably the easiest way. riversnorth.net is my website. I've also got Instagram account, Rivers North UP. Those would be the two easiest ways. I post a fair amount of stuff on Instagram during fishing season, so you can keep up with what's happening on there. And then on my website, I have a fishing report I update every couple weeks with photos and information about what's happening too.
Oh, that's great, man. That's pretty good intel with that crazy weather and seasons. But man, I can't thank you enough for sharing some stories, some adventures. Everybody out there, hit up Brad if you're interested for information. Maybe you can hook up with one of him or one of his staff members to get up if you're thinking about going to the UP. Thanks, Brad, for coming aboard, and it was a pleasure.
Awesome. Great catching up with you, Jeff, and chatting about the UP.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, all you listeners, and we're going to check out for this episode.